For tens of thousands of years, a wild predator has continuously chosen to step out of the dark and sit beside our fires. Evidence of this relationship is visible across history, from the ornate tombs of ancient Asian dynasties to the working encampments of the American Revolution. Today, we know that these companions actively lower our cortisol levels and improve our long-term cardiovascular health. The standard theory is that this relationship began as a strict survival transaction. On the freezing plains of the Pleistocene mammoth steppe, early humans likely tamed wolves to exploit their superior sense of smell, their sharp hearing, and hunting speed. This utility theory frames the origin of dogs as a cold, practical arrangement. Humans get a tracker and a guard, the animal gets leftover calories. In February 1914, workers digging a cart track through a basalt quarry in Oberkassel, Germany, hit a layer of sandy loam. Inside that layer, they found a varied grave. Radiocarbon dating placed the site in the late Paleolithic era, roughly 14,000 years ago. The grave held the skeletons of an older man, a young woman, and a canine. For decades, the logic was that this animal functioned as a fierce early wolf dog, kept around to defend the camp and take down large prey. When scientists re-examined the bones in the late 20th century, they realized the skeleton actually belonged to a juvenile puppy, only about 7.5 months old at death. This was a juvenile, not the powerful, seasoned hunter researchers anticipated. Finding a puppy in such a significant burial suggests that early domestication was not driven entirely by an animal's ability to work. Looking at the 32 bone fragments recovered from the Oberkassel site, researchers reconstructed the puppy's short life. The jaw section shows massive physical degradation, with severe enamel loss and empty sockets where teeth fell out before death. Veterinary pathologists recognize this specific pattern. It points directly to canine distemper, a viral disease the puppy likely contracted when it was roughly 19 weeks old. Distemper is an agonizing disease. In modern puppies, it carries a 75% fatality rate, battering the animal with waves of vomiting, severe dehydration, and secondary infections. In the harsh environment of the Ice Age, a sick, dehydrated animal has no chance of surviving on its own. Because unassisted survival of distemper is non-existent in the wild, the puppy's continued growth proves that human beings actively nursed the animal through a weeks-long illness. This required cleaning up after the animal, carrying fresh water, and using animal hides to keep it warm through the winter. The puppy also suffered from severe osteoarthritis, visible as bone spurs on the ulna and elbows. This joint damage was a side effect of violent neurological seizures caused by the distemper. These seizures would have left the dog permanently disabled, incapable of hunting, guarding, or carrying loads. During an era of scarce resources, these hunter-gatherers expended their own calories and water to keep a physically broken animal alive. They took on a significant biological burden for an animal that provided no labor in return. This level of commitment proves their actions were driven by deep compassion, not just a simple search for a better tool. When the dog finally died, its human companions buried it ceremonially alongside themselves. The humans were buried with specific carved objects, including a bear bone and this elk antler sculpture. By placing the puppy within this ceremonial space, the tribe recognized the animal as a valued member of their group. The Oberkassel dog suggests that the very origin of the human-dog bond was rooted in mutual emotional care. We see this foundation in modern clinical studies, where interacting with a pet is shown to lower human heart rates and support overall physiological health. The urge to care for a companion is an ancient trait of our species, established 14,000 years ago by people who chose to protect a puppy that could not protect them. Take a look at these two animals. On the left is a tiny, fragile-looking brown dog, and on the right, a towering Great Dane. It is hard to believe, but the domestic dog is the most physically variable mammal on Earth. We often assume that distinct groups like mastiffs, terriers, and spaniels have existed in these rigid, highly specific forms for thousands of years. Yet despite massive differences in skeletal structure, coat type, and overall size, every single dog on the planet belongs to the exact same species. The rigid concept of a pure dog breed, a strict genetic lineage defined by an exact physical standard, is a remarkably recent human invention. To understand what a breed actually is today, we have to drop our modern definitions and look at what dogs were before the 19th century. For the vast majority of human history, selective breeding was driven entirely by a dog's job. People needed animals to hunt, herd, or guard, and they paid very little attention to aesthetics. This practical focus produced broad dog types. In this ancient Egyptian relief, we see an early sighthound, bred specifically for the speed and agility required to chase down prey in open terrain. We see the same strict focus on utility in the archaeological record. 9,000 years ago, humans in the Siberian Arctic bred sled dogs that weighed strictly between 44 and 55 pounds. That specific size was chosen for optimal thermoregulation while pulling heavy loads in freezing temperatures. When human interference was minimal, geography took over. These populations are known as land races, dogs shaped almost entirely by environmental isolation and the demands of surviving in rural settlements. In all of these cases, physical form was simply a byproduct of survival and utility. The ancient human-dog relationship forged robust, functionally specialized animals. That utility abruptly lost its value during the Victorian era. Between 1830 and 1900, societal wealth meant dogs were no longer strictly working tools. They became fashionable accessories and markers of social status. This cultural shift was formalized in 1873 with the creation of the English Kennel Club. For the first time, organizations began actively categorizing and registering specific dog lineages. They introduced the breed standard, a highly detailed written description of an idealized dog. An animal's worth was now measured by how perfectly it matched a specific aesthetic catalog. To maintain these exact physical traits, breeders implemented closed stud books. They intentionally restricted mating to a tiny pool of registered dogs, permanently isolating them from the wider canine gene pool. By prioritizing coat colors, skull shapes, and tail angles, the Victorians effectively removed the domestic dog from natural selection, replacing functional evolution with superficial design. Today, genetic sequencing allows us to measure exactly how aggressively this period altered the canine genome. This animated chart visualizes the genetic reality of modern dogs. When researchers analyze the DNA, they find that the breeding barriers created by closed stud books are so absolute they can reliably assign 99% of individual dogs to a specific breed based purely on their genotype. By zooming out, we see the timeline of these clusters. The data proves that the vast majority of today's highly distinct breeds were derived from incredibly small founder populations over just the last 2 centuries. This timeline completely dispels the myth of the ancient breed. Dogs like the Pharaoh Hound, long believed to be historical relics from antiquity, actually have no deep genetic connection to ancestral populations. They are recent genetic recreations mixed from other breeds to fit an aesthetic standard. Science has unmasked the purebred. It is not a natural lineage, but a highly compressed 200-year genetic bottleneck. There are now over 360 globally recognized dog breeds, each existing within its own completely closed genetic silo. Because these distinct populations were derived from such a tiny number of original founders, they suffer from a catastrophic lack of genetic diversity. Combine that restricted gene pool with a strict demand for extreme physical features, and the biological consequences are severe. Breeds designed with flat faces and shortened snouts routinely experience breathing difficulties and chronic eye trouble. The ultimate cost of this isolation is time. Studies indicate that purebred dogs suffer from lifespans shortened by 1 to 2 full years compared to their mixed-breed counterparts. By prioritizing a written aesthetic standard over biological function, we have transformed our oldest companions into chronic medical patients. The genetic fragility of the purebred stands in stark contrast to the biological resilience of mixed-bred dogs and ancient land races. They benefit from heterosis, or hybrid vigor, a phenomenon where a wider, open gene pool naturally increases overall health. The purebred is not an ancient law of nature. It is a highly flawed aesthetic construct invented by the Victorians. Securing the future health and survival of man's best friend requires looking past arbitrary breed standards and embracing the genetic diversity that originally made them our ultimate companions.